Okay. I actually remembered how to do it.
I told him up until now we had an elephant do it.
I'm sure he has a good memory. Better than mine, right? Okay. I'm basing this on the last bulletin that came out. Learning sponsors, a year of learning, Friends of Malaskotsky, Moshe Zelig, Ben Mordechai, Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bas Pinchas, Friends of Herb Jeremiah, Tzvi Ben Zev, Friends of Sam Coleman, Shmuel Ben Yaakov, Friends of Gideon Lozinski, whose Hakamat Matseva we actually went to in Eretz Yisrael.
For whom?
Gideon Lozinski.
Oh, wow.
Right? Bella and David Adler in memory of her father, Ariel Ben Yosef Cohen. Those who were inspired by our Rebbetzin Emerita, Sheila Shapiro, Sarah Esther Malka, Bat Meshulam Yisacha. Gail and Leslie Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Mushka Shprinza Bat Yosef Chaim Bachava, Chanan Ben Moshe Eliezer Vachana, Pesha Bat Shmuel Yitzchak Halevi Vitzipora, Isser Ben Yoel Moshe HaKohen Vachana. Okay. Records, we didn't see them in Israel. Rexford Friends of Gladys Sherman, Kutabat Meir. Michael Klein and Friends of Judah Klein, Yehuda Tzvi Ben Chai. Marsha Bronner in memory of her husband, Harav Yerachmiel Ben Shmuel. We have a month of learning by Anne Radola in memory of her father, Mordechai Ben Eliezer, by Reuven and Susan Podolsky, in memory of his father, Tzvi Ben Pinchas. A week of learning by Ari and Judy Cohen, in memory of his mother, Fega Bat Yechiel, and her mother, Hinda Bat Moshe Zechariah Halevi. Okay. Today is the 10th, right? And we don't have any individual days of learning as of this bulletin. Did somebody do the others days yesterday? Dov and Madeline Bodlander in memory of his mother, Dov Vash Basarav Dober, Sarah and Jesse Marilis in memory of her father, Moshe Benjamin Ben Shlomo. Okay. All right, Shama's having Aliyah, Crank Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shama Talia, and the Chol B'nai Israel, good Kaben Shia. Okay. All right. Where, gentlemen, are you holding in the Gemara? I believe Nun Chet is the appropriate daf for today.
Right.
Right? Okay. All right. So if I can do a very, very short review, and then we'll go into today's daf.
We're going to start the beginning of Nun Ches.
I'm going to start actually in the Nun Zayin Amud Beis.
Nun Zayin Amud Beis.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to go through the whole item. I just want to point out that the Gemara then gave us 3 psukim, right? V'shachato, v'shachat oto, v'shachat oto. 3 items. Okay, 3 uses of psukim. In those 3 psukim, okay, Gemara told us, tlata kra'ayatire. They are extraneous, right? Right? And then it went into a long discussion into the question of what about items that were slaughtered outside the Azara, or what about items that are inappropriate and were slaughtered within the Azara? Okay, so that seemed to be an attempt to how do we apply these 3 psukim to these situations? Can we come up with examples, okay, that seem to fit this kind of situation and answer that issue of what is acceptable? Okay. Now, why do we get into this whole long, what I'll call side discursus, okay? Because we're concerned, we've been raising the question of items, okay, that a person may have benefit from in order to utilize that item in terms of kedushin. Okay, if I'm a Kohen for a moment, okay, okay, and what happens? Okay, and I get something. We're going to get to this in more detail shortly. Okay, but if I get something, all right, somebody gives me truma. Truma is mine, right? I get to eat it. Do I have tovat hana'ah from it? Okay. In other words, does it have financial value enough, okay, that it can be used for other purposes? What would that purpose be? And one example would be for kedushin. Okay. So this is the background as to why the Gemara, I believe, was trying to clarify these. Okay. And it tries to give various examples. All right. One example is ofot. All right. So if we look, so to speak, towards the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Okay. I'm going to start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom. Okay. It's second word in. Minayin the rabot et ha'ofot. Okay, what about ofot? What about that example? Okay, Talmud lomar v'shachto. Okay, v'shachat oto, v'shachat oto. Again, we try to use those 3 psukim and say one applies to one applies to another, one was going to apply to ofot. Yechol lo yishchot v'im shachat yehe mutar. Says the Gemara, it's possible that if you didn't slaughter it, okay, it would still be permitted. Talmud lomar. Here, however, the pasuk tells us, Ki yerchak mimcha hamakom, v'zavachta v'achalta, ma she'ata zovech berachok, makom ata ochel. Okay, namely that there was a limitation about bringing certain things to the Beis Hamikdash. If it was too far to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, then maybe you could slaughter it and right, and that would be acceptable. But the ideal is that you only eat from items that are korbanot, okay, and that therefore need to be brought to the Beis.
So chulin v'azora is not.
Exactly, and that's where we get to the whole question, right?
That's what we're trying to.
That's exactly. Chulin v'azara, okay, what's its status? Normally we would say, right? Okay, so that's, so prat lechulin shenishchatu ba'azara. Okay, that would exclude then chulin that's slaughtered in the azara. Ve'en li elet mimim haru'uyim li karev. But now I'm only talking about those animals that are tam, that are, let's say, certainly perfect enough to be brought on the mizbeach, right? Okay, minayin lerabot baalei mumin. How do we know on top of Nun Chet, right, that this includes animals that may not be tmimim? Okay. Marbe'ani ba'al mumim. I include those animals that are not perfect for the mizbeach. Why? Shekain min hamachshir. Why? Because they're animals of the same species. Okay. Uminayin the rabot et chaya. And how do I know then that I include non-domestic animals as well? Marbe'ani et chaya. I include these non-domestic animals. Why? Shehi b'shchita kebehema. Why? Because they would have to be slaughtered just like a domestic animal that should be brought on the mizbeach. Minayin the rabot et ha'ofot. So again, how do I include then ofot, right? Talmud lomar, again, I cite the pasuk. Talmud lomar v'shachto, you slaughter it. V'shachat oto, v'shachat oto. Again, my three psukim, claiming that one certainly applies to
Bali Mumin.
Baalei Mumim, right? And one is going to apply to Ofot, okay? And so maybe I'm going to still say the third one could apply to what we were saying before, chulin that was slaughtered in the Azara. Okay. Now, what happens? The Gemara is going to tell us. Hold on a second here, right? Even though we have these three psukim, yachol lo yishchot. It's possible that I would say that I can't slaughter it. V'im shachat yashli chenu lefnei haklavim. That maybe I would say that therefore this chulin that's brought in the Azara and gets slaughtered there. All right, since it's not going to be viable for eating, okay, because it wasn't inappropriately slaughtered in the Azara, right?
It was, but it's chulin.
But
So
it's chulin, so it's really not appropriate to be eaten as a
korban.
korban, right? And so what happens?
So yes.
So am I going to say now that the same way I have isur achila, I have isur hana'ah, and if I have isur hana'ah, I can't use it then to be mekadesh, okay? But I could use it. Now I'm going to say, but maybe I could throw it to animals, to dogs, and therefore I do get hana'ah from it, and therefore I should be able to be using it for kedushin. Talmud lomar, text tells us, the kelev tashlichunoto.
No, you're getting, they're getting
Right. Oto atamashlich lekelev. This, okay, in other words, that items, you could
The nevela and the tray.
right, nevela treifa, we do. Ve'ia tamashlich chulin shenishchatu ba'azara. But you do not throw to dogs a chulin that was slaughtered in the Azara. Therefore, you do not have any hana'ah with them. Exactly. So what happens? We now see that there is this shaila, okay, about this item. Okay? What happens? Ashkechinu Mar Yehuda, the Rav Yosef ula Rav Shmuel. It happened that Mar Yehuda found Rav Yosef and Rav Shmuel, Berei, Rabbah, the son of Rabbah, Bar Chana, Dahavu Kaime Apitcha Debe Rabbah, that they were hanging out around the entrance to the academy of Rabbah. Okay, and so he asks them, Amar Lahu, right? Tanya, we have a braita that teaches Hamikadesh Bepeter Chamor, one who uses the for the purposes of kiddushin, the firstborn of a donkey, b'basar b'chalav, or meat that has been involved with milk, ubechulin shenishchatu ba'azara, which is exactly our concern here, right? Rabbi Shimon Omer mikudeshet. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's possible to use those items and have benefit from them, therefore to use it for kiddushin, right? V'chachamim omrim eina mikudeshet. But the sages disagree and say, no, it's not viable. These are asur, and not only are they asur achila, but they're asur hana'ah, and therefore you cannot use it for kiddushin purposes.
But the Mishnah said that you convert it to money, it's good.
Well, that's what we're going to get to. That's the question, right? Alma, however, what happens? Chulin shenishkatu ba'azara, the Rabbi Shimon loved araita. This seems, however, to imply that Rabbi Shimon must hold that the prohibition on using chulin that was slaughtered in the temple precinct is not a Torah mandated prohibition, but is only d'Rabbanan. Okay, why is that? Well, it's possible that Rabbi Shimon holds his general principle that if a slaughter is not, could it be done on the Mizbeach, but if it's not viable for eating, then it's not considered a viable slaughter. Okay, and if it's not considered a viable slaughter, all right, then the animal is still chulin. And if it's still chulin, you could use it for kiddush, sell it or use it for kiddushin. Okay, all right. So what happens? So that's the point. Al mechulin shenishkatu ba'azara, the Rabbi Shimon lavdo right. See what happens? We're minhu, but we'll challenge this. Why? Because elsewhere we have the following. Rabbi Shimon Omer, chulin shenishkatu ba'azara, yisrofu, that has to be burnt. So if it has to be burnt, doesn't that seem to contradict what he said earlier, right? That it implied that it could be used for kiddushin. V'chein chaya shenishkata ba'azara. And likewise, he says, an animal, a non-domestic animal that would be slaughtered in the temple precinct.
Would be burned.
Okay, so what happens is that Rabbi Shimon holds both unconsecrated and wild, okay, to be burnt, okay, and therefore that seems to be this, shows us this contradiction. And that's why we say that it has to be rabbinic and not biblical. Okay, Ishtaku, all right, they were silent, they didn't have an answer. Oh, all right, so what happened? Atula kame de Rava, they came before Rava. Amar lahu, and Rava said to them, Palga, okay, namely he's calling this one who started off this whole discussion, right? Right? Rabbi Yehuda, he called him quarrelsome, bothersome, okay? In other words, he asks questions that always cause issues, machlokas and stuff like that. Okay? Palga ok minche. He was the one that forced you to ask this kind of question. Right? Hava amina, right? And what is right? That's the point. Kigon shenishchata v'nimtzei treifa. What about, but you could have a situation where the animal was slaughtered on the Mizbeach, and then really it was treifa milachatchila, but you didn't know that until after you slaughtered it, right? Rabbi Shimon Latame, and Rabbi Shimon held according to his particular own reasoning, namely the Tanya, where he taught, as taught in the Braita, Hashochet et hatreifa, one who slaughters an animal that's treifa, v'chein hashochet v'nimtzei treifa, and also an animal that's slaughtered and you discover that it's treifa, zeh v'zeh chulin ba'azara. Both of those then should be considered, since you're not able to eat it, they're considered chulin. If it's chulin, then it could be used, all right, still belong to the individual who brought it, all right, and they could use it then for kiddushin purposes. Rabbi Shimon matir bahana'a, v'chachamim osrim, that Rabbi Shimon then permits its use. And what use were we talking about? Kiddushin, as opposed to the sages who don't. Okay, now we go on. Machran, okay? Let's say our next part of our Mishnah, right? That is, you had these items and you sold it. You got money for it, okay? Sold it to a Gentile, let's say. V'kidesh, b'damehem, and one used that money, okay, for kiddushin, mikudeshet, okay, that she would then be mikudeshet. So in other words, it's not valid for eating this shchita. Maybe it's not valid since that was the point.
Like hegdish,
right?
You transfer them.
That's we're going to get
hegdish. It still remains
okay.
Hegdish, and the money becomes hegdish as well.
Right.
So the question is here: are these articles if you sell it, does the
Does the
Hagdish
money
still remain on the
acquire the same status?
Right.
That's,
right?
and we're going to see that spelled out in the Gemara moment in a little bit more. Okay. So what happens? Minalan. Okay. How is it possible then that we can say that this money could be used for kiddushin purposes? All right.
That's
Me-
also no. That
Right? Midigale Rachmana Bavodat Kochavim. Okay? That we see this based on something we learned regarding Torah law vis-a-vis idolatry. We have a pasuk that tells us, Vahayita Cherem Kamohu. Okay, that it will be Cherem, in other words, not usable, not acceptable, just like it. In other words, implying that if the original item is forbidden, that anything derived from it also, that forbidden status becomes transferred to the item. Okay? Namely, kol she'ata mehaya himena, anything from which you, I'm going to use the word derive here, or exists from it. Right? Arehu kemohu, and it exactly like it. In other words, what's generated from it, namely the avodah zara, is like it, and therefore similarly to be prohibited. Okay? Miklau, therefore, that would seem to imply the kol isurim shebetorah sharu, that other things where the item itself is prohibited, maybe the derivative might be permitted. Okay? V'nilef mina, and therefore we would learn from this.
so Frank, the more asking a kasha, we should learn from avodah zarah to everywhere else.
But maybe that's an exception.
Well, I mean,
We're going to see. It's going to see. Right. We're going to see that's not going to be the case. Mishum dahava avodat kochavim ushvi'it shnei ktuvim habaim ke'echad. But don't we have a situation here where we have two different psukim that teach the same thing? And we normally say that when we have two psukim that teach the same thing, the principle is you can't derive further limud from that situation. Okay? So what happens? Says the Gemara clearly, V'chol shnei ktuvim habaim ke'echad ein milamdin. That two verses that give us the very same halacha, we can't derive, so to speak, a third example from that. Right? Avodat kochavim hada amran, regarding the prohibition vis-a-vis idolatry, just as we've said, we cited a pasuk that clearly told us that. Shvi'it ma'ihi, what about shvi'it? How do we know that items that are grown during shvi'it can what do I want to say? That the item itself is not only prohibited, but any derivative of that item is also going to be prohibited. Gemara is going to go into that in a moment. Why? We have a pasuk. Yovel hi kodesh tihiyeh lachem. Why? It is yovel. And then if it's grown then in that year, it is kodesh. It has sacred status. Right? Ma kodesh tofes et damav. And this is the phrase that Ruvain was pointing out to us earlier, that namely it carries over, it transfers its sacred status from the original item to what could be, I'm going to use the word, exchanged in its place. Okay? That's what happens. We have the same lesson that the prohibition to benefit from it is transferred to something else, right? Tofes et damav, af shvi'it. So likewise, those items that are grown at that point, okay, tofes et dameha, it's going to transfer the prohibition as well onto its money, all right, or anything else, right? A ma kodesh tofes damav, v'yotzei chulin. But wait a minute. Maybe I might argue that I could redeem the item from its sacred status. And therefore that item then becomes chulin. And I could use it. Right? Af shvi'it tofes dameha v'yotzei lechulin. So couldn't I argue that the same thing might be regarding produce from the Shemitah year? Okay, that I could take that and sell it, okay, or give it, and therefore, right, becomes chulin. Talmud lomar tihiyeh, but the Torah text says it shall become, namely, bahaviata tahei, namely, it's going to continue in its present status of being sacred, of being kodesh, and therefore we can't argue that it becomes chulin. No, it transfers its sacred status, its kodesh status, to the next item. Ketzad. What do we mean? How do we know this? Here's the following example, says the Gemara. Lakach b'peirot shvi'i. If someone purchases or acquires produce from Shemitah year, okay, and he uses it to get the basar. What's the status of that meat? Elu ve'elu midba'arin b'shvi'it. In other words, that meat retains its kodesh status because it too, like any produce of Shvi'it, right? What happens at Shvi'it, we have a requirement that it can't be consumed, it has to be burned. And that's what we have to do. Let's say he bought with that money of Shvi'it produce from the meat, and he sold that meat and used money to buy something else, dagim, right? What happens? And further on down the line, yetze basar v'nichnesu dagim, right? The meat goes out, but the fish then acquire that sacred status, that kodesh, b'dagim yayin. Okay, so we continue the same thing. You get the money for the fish, you buy wine. What happens? That kodesh status gets transferred onto the wine. Yatsu dagim nichnas yayin. Okay, going on. Biyayin shemen. Okay, sold the wine, used the money to buy oil. What happens? That oil gets the kodesh status. Yatsa yayin nichnas shemen. Ha ketzad. How is that possible? Right? Acharon nitpas b'shvi'i. That even down to the last item, it still has transferred that kodesh status from that shvi'it, from the produce of the Shemitah year, of the Shvi'it year, right? Upiri atzmo asur. And that produce itself was forbidden. Okay?
Always remains us.
Right. Okay.
Always remains us.
Hanech leman damar ein melamdin. That's understandable. That whole, let's call it benefit, okay, transfer and transfer and transfer. If you say you can't learn it from two psukim, right? Because we said you learned it from Avodah Zarah and Shvi, right? The same thing. But what happens about those who don't hold that principle of Ein Melamdin, right? Ela Laman Da'amar Melamdin. But those who learn the Kud, Mai Ikala Meimar, what are you going to say then? Mi'ute Kative. We're going to see that in the psukim, we actually have a miut, a derivative of something that limits, namely, Ktiv Hacha. In one case, it's written, Ki Cherim Hu. That's the example of Avodah Zarah, that it is prohibited. Who? It itself. Uktiv Hatam. And it's written there in the other example of Shvi'it, Yovel He. Okay, again, language of limitation. He ein Midi achrina lo. And therefore we would learn from this. It itself is where it's the prohibited, something else, no. Okay. So based on that, what do we have at the end here? Okay. So does the Kohen have financial value to that product? Seems questionable. Matnitin, a new Mishnah, clearly is going to now deal specifically with Kohen. Hamikadesh b'trumot. Okay, the Kohen, we know, gets his trumot, right? Secondly, uma'asrot, right? He gets trumat ma'aser, right? There's another portion to the Kohen. Matanot, he gets portions of the animal, certain parts of the animal, the shok and a few other parts. I think 3 or 4, right? Okay, goes to the Kohen. All right. Then ubamei chatat, ubaafar chatat, and there's a question there, by the way, of the girsa, or be'efer chatat. Are we talking about the water with the ashes in it? Okay, or are we talking about the ashes only? All right. So in other words, all of these items clearly are the property, thank you, of the Kohen. All right. Harei zo mikudeshet va'afilu Yisrael. Okay, they are, the issue being, if they are the property, if they are under the ownership of the Kohen, then that's his property. He can get hana'ah from it, right? And therefore use it to be Mekadesh. But our Mishnah is saying that doesn't simply apply to a Kohen, it applies to a Yisrael as well.
That if he's Mekadosh a Yisrael, the Kedushin is good.
Okay. Is that how you learned it?
Yeah.
Okay. If the Kohen is Mekadesh Yisrael, I learned it.
No,
No. Even if a Yisrael uses those items to be Mekadesh, a woman, it is valid for him. Okay, that's Amar Ula. So Ula says as follows: Tovat Hana'ah Eino Mamon. Tovat Hana'ah, remember, is that the Kohen has what we're going to call a controlling interest in terms of this item. And he can make the determination as to who is going to get, or the person who is going to get that item. Right. In other words, the example we might say is that Yisrael has a father-in-law that's a Kohen. Right. And the father-in-law, he could give it to his father-in-law. Or the father-in-law says to him, you know what? I've got a buddy Kohen here who needs it more than I do, exactly. I will give you some money if you give him your trumot, etc., etc. Okay, so that's the implication. All right, but Ula's argument is that controlling interest is not worth money. It's not the same as money. Eitive Rabbi Abba le'Ula. And Rabbi Abba challenges Ula and says, but we have a text, a Mishnah, that, okay, it happens to be our Mishnah, that says clearly, Hamikadesh b'trumot, u'ma'asrot, u'b'matanot, one who does kiddushin using these items, right? B'mei chatat, all these items, u'be'efer or ba'afar para, Harei zo mikudeshet va'afilu Yisrael. Not only can the Kohen use it, but even a Yisrael can use it, right? Amarle, and he said to him, Hacha b'Yisrael shenaflulo tvalim mibeit avi imo Kohen. No, he says, what we're talking about here when we say that an Israelite can use it, what was the situation? He inherited this Israel, he inherited a mixture of items that was both Tevel and and Kodesh. That's what happens from his grandfather, so to speak, mother's father, right? V'kasavar matanot shelo hurmu, and where he see that he's of the opinion that when it's a gift like this inheritance that has not had truma taken yet, right? Kami shehermu damyan. Okay, it's as if the truma has been taken. Why? Because my grandfather Chas v'Sholem would never have left tevel all around. He must have taken truma at some point from it. Okay, by mine Rabbi Chia bar Avi mi Rav Huna, and so the question is asked by Rabbi Chia to Rav Huna: Tovas hana'ah mamon or no mamon? Is it like money or isn't it like money? Amarle, he said to him, Tini tuha, didn't we learn this already? Right? Hamikadesh betrumot umasrot umatanot b'meichatat. Right? One who has, this is our Mishnah, right? Ubafar para or efa para, hare zo mikudeshet, vafilu Yisrael. Isn't this seem to give the answer? Right? Amarle, he said. But wait a second. When we learned this Mishnah, wasn't it contingent, I'm going to use that phrase, on a situation as follows. V'lavo kimna b'Yisrael shenaflu lo tvalim mibeit avi imo kohen. Wasn't it only contingent on that particular kind of situation and not ordinarily? We go to the Amud Beis, right? Amarle, what happens? He says to him, Hotza'ah. Okay, that's that kind of an answer is very unlettered, outside. It's not appropriate. It makes you seem like a dumbbell. Okay, basically, by giving that kind of answer. Hotza'at, all right? Ichsif. And so he was embarrassed as a result of having raised that issue. Hu savar mishma'ata ka'amarle. He thought he was basically giving an answer that was appropriate. All right. Rabbi Asi the Hutzal kai kavate. No, achi ka'amina. No, this is what I really meant when I called you Hotzah. Namely, you were giving an alternative answer. Okay? Like that which Rabbi Asi of Hutzal has given in terms of interpreting that Mishnah. Okay? So what happens? Nemak Tanai. Shall we say then that we have a machloket then on this issue? Right? Namely, how about the following example? Hagonev tivalo shel chavero, one who steals the tevel of his neighbor. Mishalem lo demei tivlo shel chavero. According to this Braita, right? He should pay him the monetary equivalent of that tevel. Divrei Rebbe. That's the view of Rebbe. Okay? Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer, he disagrees. And he says, Eino mishalem ela dmei chulin shebo. No, all he has to pay is the equivalent money of the chulin. Okay, not what was Kodesh. Tevel, remember, is mixed. Chulin and Kodesh. So what happens? So that's the machlok. Mai lav bahakim miflagei. Isn't this what they seem to be arguing about? Demar savar tovat hana'am mamon. That one is of the opinion that the controlling interest by the individual is equivalent to monetary value. Umar savar tovat hana'a einam mamon. And the other holds that such controlling interest is not financially valued. Lo. No, says the Gemara. The kuli alma tovat hana'ah eina mamon. No, everybody agrees that the controlling interest really is not equal to actual financial value. Vahacha b'tvalim shenaflu lo mibeit avi imo kohen. Okay, but what they're arguing about is the status of whether that tevel was taken, whether truma was taken from that tevel. That's what they're arguing about. Ubamatanot shelo hurmu kamisha hurmu damyan kamiflage. And whether any gifts like this inheritance, right, had truma taken from it, okay, and whether you can assume that that was the case. That's what they're arguing about. Namely, Mar Savar, Kamisha Hurmu, Damyan. One was of the opinion that by inheriting that gift, clearly it must have been a situation that Truma was already taken. Umar Savar, Lav Kamisha Hurmu, Damyan. And the other must be of the opinion that no, you can't make the assumption automatically that Truma was taken. V'bayit ema. And if you want, I would say maybe the argument of the Tanaim was as follows. Dekuli alma kamisha hurmudam. That everybody agrees that we assume that when the gift is given, Truma was taken from it. V'tovat hana'ah eina mamon. But we're going to say that the controlling interest is not a financial item, right? Vahacha b'deshmuel kamiflagei, and they're arguing about a view, a position of Shmuel, right? Da'amar Shmuel, who said as follows: Chita achat poteret et hakeren, that a single segment, grain, thank you, okay, of wheat is enough to be considered giving truma to the entire pile. Okay? In other words, all he has to do is take a little bit, right? Damar itle de Shmuel, that maybe one master holds like Shmuel, umar litle de Shmuel, and maybe the other master doesn't hold like Shmuel. Okay, v'ibayat ema, or perhaps I'll say as follows: what's this argument, the Tanaitic argument about? The Kuli Alma Litlaho de Shmuel, that everybody agrees they don't hold like Shmuel in that case. Vahacha, and here, Hainu Tama, the Rebbe. And this is the view of Rebbe. Okay, why did Rebbe say that he had to pay the entire Tevel? The Kansuhu Rabbanan Leganav, that the rabbis penalized him just as they would penalize a thief, right? V'bayat ema, or if you want, I would say, the kuli alma it laho de Shmuel. Maybe everybody holds like Shmuel. Vahacha hainu tama de Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, and this is the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. The kansuhu Rabbanan, the Baal Habayit, de lo ibaye le l'shehayvaya l'tevle, that they penalized the original owner of that item, of that produce, right? Why? Because he didn't see the requirement, the necessity, as it was to remove the tevel or to leave the tevel as it was mixed in with the item. Okay? So let's finish up. Tnan, we have a bright. Hamikadesh betrumot u'b'masrot u'b'matanot. Okay, b'mei chatat, u'be'efer u'ba'afar para, harei zo mikudeshet, be'afal pish Yisrael. Okay, similar to our Mishnah. Urminhu, but we're going to challenge this with the following. Hanotel sechar ladun, one who receives payment for rendering judgment, dinav betelin, his judgments are considered null and void. Laha'id, if he receives payment to give testimony, eduto betela, his testimony again is null and void. Lahazot ulekadish. Okay, if he was a Kohen and he received payment to sprinkle or to make Kodesh, okay, in other words, carry out certain other parts of the avoda, okay, miyamav, okay, miyamahara, okay, can we say that that meimav, that his water, okay, for the sprinkling on the right is like water from a cave. In other words, it's no, there's no kapara, there's no anything with it. Va'afaro ephramakle. Or can we say then that his dirt, his dust, is the ashes are just like common ashes, and nothing has no sacred quality. So there again, there is no kapara with it, right? Amar Abai lo kasha. Abai is arguing, no, there's no problem here. Why can? What are we talking about? Okay, bischar haba'a umilui. One hand, we're talking about the fact that any payment who's given him is because he's went and got the water and transported it and brought it in. In other words, it's schar halecha. That's all it is. Not for the actual ritual act, but for simply going and providing the necessary items. Okay. Kan b'schar haza'ah v'kiddush. But you can't pay the person regarding the actual sprinkling or the
Mixing of
sanctification.
the water,
The whole
the
process,
ashes and the water.
right, for the purification. Daikanami, and we can deduce this from the language. Why? The katani, because it's taught hacha here. B'mei chatat ube'efer ube'afar para. Okay, Rashi and Tosafot, I think, have a little item here as to whether we continue to read it as be'efer or ba'afar para. Uktani hatam, and we're taught there lahazot lekadesh shmamina, namely, and that you apply that to say, and that's why one of the views is if you say the ashes itself, okay, is not acceptable. That's where we say for the purpose of sprinkling and of sanctification. And that's how we learn it. Hadrana lach ha'ish makadesh, and we'll stop right there for today. Okay? All right. Ruvain, thank you as usual, keeping me on task. Okay, I got to remember to shut off the Zoom, right? While I was in Israel, I was also using not a Zoom, but somebody. I'm walking home. You have a ride?
No, I'm one.
You're walking?
Yeah. Are you in a dangerous area?
Not really, but there was an Arab village somewhat close, and some of the residents of our building were a bit concerned. So what they're going to do is they're going to change the security code to get into the building, number one. And number two, some people were asking to put additional locks on some of their doors. So that's in their apartments. So
When did you leave the home?
we left last Wednesday. We flew to Newark, where we spent one day with my sister-in-law and brother-in-law in Teaneck, and then we drove up to White Plains and spent Yom Tov with my youngest son and his wife and two little boys.
pleasure to have you back for.
I'm back till.
Apparently when you leave Eric as well.
No. No. Yeah. Yeah, that's what he's saying is another, what he was saying is, I didn't really mean to call you an ignoramus, okay? What I really meant was that you were following the example, an alternative explanation. Ravasi of is an agreement. Yeah. Kind of like, to call somebody an ignoramus like that. Yeah. No, I still have notes from the last time I did it. I gotta put my stuff away. Yeah.
Family that was, they would come.
Uh-huh.
We're back here now. One of the guys who lives in Minneapolis, he's in Munson. He's got to take his daughter with him.
Yeah.
The other one from Minneapolis was driving to Texas with his son-in-law.
Wow.
He's a big fellow down there.
Really? Yeah. Yeah. Goodness. All right, everybody, take care. Hey, how are you? Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, how are you?
Hold on.
Sorry I couldn't call you back last
Okay,
night.
no emergency.
I will call you. I'll get you back. Welcome back to the States.
You too. Ken, if you want me even now to just do something again, what is going on the other side and how they're thinking, I'm happy to do it. Either side.
You heard they announced the 2:30 event?
Yeah.
Did they announce
Of course,
it? Hi, how you doing? Okay. I was away for Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I got back from Israel last Wednesday. We were in Jersey for a day and then up in New York for Yonta's last days. And then we came back to Boca.
Made it up before the plane.
Before, yeah.
Yeah.
You have those keys. If you have it. Crazy. From Publix. Hi, how are you? Thank you. I do. You know, we spent most of the time there just getting the apartment together and things like that. And a few times that we went out to dinner, we always went out with couples from here that are there. All right, we'll talk later. Take care.